Good day everyone, I'm Ira Castro and we are the Group 4. The topic that we've got is genetics and behavior. What is genetics? Genetics is the scientific study of heredity. Genetics pertains to humans and all other organisms. For example, human genetics, animal genetics like mouse genetics, firefly genetics, and etc. Genetics can help us to understand why people look the way they do and why some people are more prone to certain diseases than others. Genetics can help healthcare professionals to identify certain conditions in babies before they born using techniques in prenatal testing. Behavior is an action that is observable and measurable. It is what you see or hear, such as students sitting down, standing up, speaking up, whispering, yelling, or writing, or a child has a tantrum, and that's an example of bad behavior. Behavior genetics is also called psychogenetics, the study of the influence of an organism's genetic composition on its behavior and the interaction of heredity and environment insofar as they affect behavior. Chromosomes are structures in the nucleus of cell containing DNA, histone protein, and other structural proteins. Chromosomes also contain genes, most of which are made up of DNA and RNA. DNA determine whether our eyes are blue or brown, how tall we will be, and even our preference for a certain types of behavior. Known as our genetic code, it is shaped like a double helix made of sequence of nucleic acids attached to a sugar phosphate backbone. Genes are subsections of DNA molecules linked together that create a particular characteristic. Human chromosomes are divided into two types, autosomes and sex chromosomes. Some genetic traits are linked to a person's sex and therefore passed on by sex chromosomes. The autosomes contain the remainder of a person's genetic information. All human beings have 23 pairs of chromosomes by which genetic material is developed and characteristically demonstrated. 22 of these are autosomes, while the remaining pair represents a person's sex chromosomes. These 23 pairs of chromosomes work together to create the person we ultimately become. Common abnormalities include Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, and many more. Genetic counseling is available for families in order to determine if any abnormalities exist that may be passed along to offspring. Many chromosomal abnormalities are of psychological importance with substantial impacts on mental processes. For example, Down syndrome can cause mild to moderate intellectual disabilities rather.
Good day. Today I would be discussing about chromosomes and genes. So what are chromosomes? Chromosomes are structures in the nucleus of a cell containing DNA, histone protein, and other structural proteins. Chromosomes also contain genes, most of which are made up of DNA and RNA. DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid determines whether our eyes are blue or brown, how tall we will be, and even our preference for certain types of behavior. Known as our genetic code, it is shaped like a double helix made of sequences like nucleic acids attached to a sugar phosphate backbone. Genes are subsections of DNA molecules linked together that create a particular characteristic. Each chromosome is made up of single DNA coiled around histone proteins. Research dating back to the 1600s show that every living creature has a specific set of chromosomes in the nucleus of its own cells. Human chromosomes, however, are divided into two types: autosomes and sex chromosomes. Some genetic traits are linked to a person's sex and therefore passed on by the sex chromosomes. The autosomes contain the remainder of a person's genetic information. All human beings have 23 pairs of chromosomes, by which genetic material is developed and characteristically demonstrated. 22 of these are autosomes, while the remaining pair, either XX for female or XY for the male, represents a person's sex chromosomes. The 23 pairs of chromosomes work together to create the person we ultimately become. Chromosomal abnormalities can occur during fetal development if something goes wrong during the replication of cells. Common abnormalities include Down syndrome, caused by an extra chromosome number 21, a Klinefelter syndrome, caused by an extra X chromosome, and Turner syndrome, caused by a missing X chromosome. Genetic counseling is available for families in order to determine if any abnormalities exist that may be passed along the offspring. Many chromosomal abnormalities are of psychological importance, with a substantial impacts on mental processes. For example, Down syndrome can cause mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. As for science advances, the ability to manipulate chromosomes is becoming more realized. Cloning is an example of taking chromosomal and genetic material and creating a new animal, and was first successfully achieved in the famous example of Dolly the sheep. Although there is much controversy surrounding the manipulation of chromosomes in human beings, with many people believing it to be unethical. But there are still advantages to this. There are its pros and cons, but let's not be sidetracked. And my next group mate would be discussing about nurture versus nature. Thank you.
My name is Elgin Chan, and we are now going to talk about the gene environment correlations, nature, and nurture. So, genetic expression can be influenced by various social factors as well as environmental factors, from light and temperature to exposure to chemicals. So, our genetic destiny is not necessarily written in stone. It can be influenced by several factors, such as social factors, as well as environmental influences, among which will live, including anything from the light and temperature to exposure to chemicals. The environment, I mean, in which a person is raised can be trigger the expression of behavior for which a person is genetically predisposed, while the same person raised in a different environment may exhibit different behavior. Long-standing debates have taken place over the idea of which factor is more important, genes or environment. Is a person destined to have a particular outcome in life because of his or her genetic makeup? Or can the environment work to change what might be considered bad genes? Today, it is generally agreed upon that neither genes nor environment work alone, rather, the two work in tandem to create the people we ultimately become. Environmental elements like light and temperature have been shown to induce certain changes in genetic expression. Additionally, exposure to drugs and chemicals can significantly affect how genes are expressed. People often inherit sensitivity to the effects of various environmental risk factors, and different individuals may be differently affected by exposure to the same environment in medically significant ways. For example, sunlight exposure has much stronger influence on skin cancer risk in fair-skinned humans than in individuals with an inherited tendency for darker skin. The color of a person's skin is largely genetic, but the influence of the environment will affect these genes in different ways. Gene environment correlations, known as RGE, can be explained in three particular ways. This is the passive, uh, evocative, or active. passive gene environment correlations. In passive gene environment correlation, an association exists between a person's genetic makeup and the environment in which he or she is raised. In other words, the person's environment, particularly in the case of children, is largely determined by the parents' uh, genetic characteristics. Parents create a home environment that is influenced by their own heritable characteristics. When the children's own genotype influences their behavior or cognitive outcomes, uh, the result can be a misleading relationship between environment and outcome. For example, an intelligent parent is likely to create a home environment rich in educational materials and experience. Since intelligence is moderately heritable, it can be agreed that the intelligence in the child is inherited rather than a factor of the home environment created by the parents. It is relatively unclear whether the genetic or environmental factors had more to do with the child's development. The next is evocative gene environment correlations. Uh, uh, Evocative gene environment correlation happens when an individual's behavior evokes an environmental response. For example, the association between marital conflict and depression may reflect the tensions that arise when engaging with a depressed spouse rather than a casual effect of marital conflict on risk for depression. And the other one, active gene environment correlations. In active gene environment correlation, the person's genetic makeup may lead them to select particular environments. For example, a shy person is likely to choose quiet activities and less boisterous environment than an extroverted individual. He or she may be more likely to spend time at the library than at a dance club. So, adaption and twin studies in the nature versus nurture debate, adaption and twin studies can help make sense of the influence of genes and the environment. Studies of adult twins are used to investigate which traits are heritable. Identical twins share the same genotype, meaning their genetic makeup is the same. Twins raised apart tend to be similar in intelligence and in some cases life events and circumstance when studied later years later, even when raised separately. However, researchers have discovered that the phenotype of identical twins grows apart as they age. In adoption studies, identical twins raised by different families can give insight into the nature versus nurture debate. Since the child being raised by parents who are genetically different from his or her biological parents, the influence of environment shows in uh, is to similar how similar the child is to his or her adoptive parents or siblings. Adoption studies make a strong case for the influence of environment, whereas twin studies make a strong case for genetic influence. That is all. Thank you.
Genes are instructions that indicate how a person's body is made, the same way that blueprints are instructions to build a house. Information from genes let the body know what characteristic a person will have. These instructions came from our parents. When their genes are mixed together, our set of genes is formed. This is why we often look like mixture of our parents. Research over the past few years has shown the genetic behind complex behaviors are more complicated than we first thought. Differences in behavior aren't the result of a handful of genes. Researchers use a fruit fly as an example. Fruit flies fight over their food, and whether how rough they will varies from their genes. A single fruit fly carries 100,000 neurons, all the while the brain of human contains 100 billion neurons. Therefore, any study claiming a single gene can predict your sexuality or even your behavioral tendencies is either irrelevant or straight up lying. The relationship between genes and behavior can change over time as we have new experiences. In some situations, genes play a larger role in determining your behavior. In other situations, the environment plays a larger role in influencing our behavior.
Hi, good day. The assigned topic to me is about the effect of behavior on our genes. So, there are different instances that our behavior affect our genes. So, this is very important for us to be known because as early as prenatal period, it could affect us. And in order for us to reduce its negative environmental and behavioral effect on our genes. First, drugs and alcohol. Prenatal exposure to certain substances, particularly drugs and alcohol, has a detrimental effect on a growing fetus. It is widely studied and proven by different scientists and doctors. Second, temperature. Temperature can affect the gene expressions. For example, in Himalayan rabbits, the genetic expression of eyes, fur, and skin are regulated by temperature. Third, light. Light exposure also influences genetic expression. Thomas Hunt Morgan performed an experiment in which he exposed some caterpillars to light and kept others in darkness. Those exposed to certain light frequencies had corresponding wing colors when they became butterflies, while darkness resulted in the palest wing color, leading him to conclude that light exposure influenced the genes of the butterflies. In this manner, a caterpillar's behavior can directly affect gene expression. A caterpillar that actively seeks out light will appear different as a butterfly than one that avoids it. And lastly, nutrition. Lack of proper nutrition in early childhood is yet another factor that can lead to the alteration of genetic makeup. Human children who lack proper nutrition in the first 3 years of life tend to have more genetic problems later in life, such as health issues and problems with school performance.